Did you ever hear about the inventor that invented an incandescent light 20 years before Edison invented the light bulb? Probably not. Or the guy who applied for a patent for the telephone 2 hours after Alexander Graham Bell? Probably didn't hear about that guy either. Or you might not have heard about the guy who invented in 1940 a fifth column finder, right? Uncovering like traitors who were doing sabotage in the 1940s. That and a lot more coming up here on this week's episode of Strange As It Seems. Welcome back. I'm Jeff Hicks, curator of the Strange As It Seems archives and grandnephew of John Hicks, who created Strange As It Seems back in the late 1920s. Last week, we dived into the folder on inventions. This week, we're going to dive into the folder on inventors. I found right next to it in the Strange As It Seems Hicks family archives. So let's dive right in. So we'll start in the John Hicks era, which ran from when it was first published in 1928 through 1944, when John Hicks passed away on D-Day, strange as it seems, from myocarditis. But he ran simultaneously to Strange As It Seems. On Sundays, you would oftentimes see the John Hicks scrapbook, in which he compiled a bunch of ideas together. And this one in 1943, January 17th, he entitled Masterminds. We covered a little bit of this last week about how Egyptianizing clay was discovered from the Bible. But around the horn on this same John Hicks scrapbook, had some really interesting stories about inventors. One of them which was Richard Jordan Gatling, who invented the Gatling gun, the world's first machine gun. Strange as it seems, he invented it in an attempt to end war. He was thinking that the nations would outlaw war as a result once he invented it, and the idea backfired on him. There's also the dream inventor, the half-tone process, which first made possible the reproduction of photographs in newspapers, and it was invented by the late Frederick Ives in his sleep. Interestingly enough, came to him in a dream. Ithaca, New York, back in 1878. Did you know that the inventor of the merry-go-round and the inventor of the ferris wheel, they never met each other? Apparently they moved in different circles. And in answer to a question at the top of the episode, have you ever heard of Elisha Gray? Probably not. But he also invented the telephone and applied for a patent the very same day as Alexander Graham Bell. But unfortunately, his patent was applied 2 hours later, and the invention went to Alexander Graham Bell instead. There's also an inventor that you've probably never heard of, Sir Joseph Swan, who is a British physicist. He actually invented a workable incandescent light 20 years ahead of Edison's invention. Fascinating. In 1860. Strange as it seems. And here's an amazing inventor that John Hicks discovered during his Strange As It Seems era. Mac Brainerd, who lived right around the corner from John Hicks and Ernest Hicks, lived in the Hollywood Hills. And here's an inventor who invented a telephone with a 20-mile range, which he carries in his car. One of the first car phones ever invented. He can make local or long-distance calls or answer his home phone from his car. After tinkering with radio equipment for 7 years, 18-year-old Mac Brainerd has rigged up an instrument in his car, which rings whenever his home phone rings. Crazy. This was in the Hollywood Entertainer from January 31st, 1941. He invented it because his mother wanted him to stay home and answer the telephone when he wanted to go out. So Carl Mac Brainerd, 18, invented a portable telephone, which rings in his car when the Brainerd telephone rings at home. And so far, the telephone company has made no objection to the youth maintaining an extension without paying for it. And crazy. Mac often parks in front of a friend's house, calls him, then jumps out of the car for a personal appearance almost as soon as the astonished friend has put down the telephone. Mac Brainerd, 18-year-old inventor, Hollywood, California, back in 1941. You know, I just read that the inventor of autocorrect died yesterday. Yeah, apparently his funfair is next monkey. I mean, here's a really interesting invention from a Mr. Roy Post, who was a criminologist. It's about 10 years before the McCarthy era, but the idea of fifth columnists, this I think was started back in the time of Franco in Spain in the late 1930s. But Roy Post here invented basically a postometer, as he called it, and it allowed him to identify fifth columnists. Crazy. Because I have a plan whereby I am willing to train law enforcement officers throughout the United States on the use of my postometer, which is a truth finder. Crazy. This machine, as you know, can detect when someone is telling a lie, and by applying it to the masses now employed in national defense preparations, right? This is a year before 1941, by the way, and the U.S. joined World War II. It's impossible to ferret out every fifth columnist. Strange as it seems, Mr. Hicks, I, one person, can single-handedly put this momentous plan into operation, and if you can, through the medium of your feature, bring this notice to the attention of America, you will be lending a hand in this most necessary work. Sincerely yours, Roy Post. Then after John Hicks, extending into the Ernest Hicks era, when my grandfather Ernest took over. After John Hicks passed away in 1944, we did have one from the Ernest Hicks era, the Postcellier, French army engineer. He invented the Postcellier cell, which was the first apparatus by which an independent straight line could be drawn without the use of a straight edge. Crazy. The inventor Postcellier, strange as it seems. And then we move on into the 1950s when my grandma Elsie Hicks took over. Strange as it seems, after Ernest Hicks died in a plane crash in 1948. But here we have Otto Mergenthaler, the inventor of the linotype. Fascinating, the second greatest invention apparently in printing. And he was basically a watchmaker. And employed for many years to keep clocks and electric bells in order throughout government buildings. And he invented the linotype. Another really interesting one, though, I think in this same Strange as it seems that I found quite fascinating, was the musical varnish. Apparently, in the famed old Stradivarius violins, the varnish was the greatest factor in the perfection and tone of the Stradivarius violins, and how it was made and applied remains a mystery. The inventor of the crossword puzzle just moved into my neighborhood. He lives 5 streets down, 2 houses across. And here's a man you've probably never heard of, John Ott. He assisted Thomas Edison for 47 years. He was his right-hand man and assistant. He died almost the exact same day, really the day after Edison, on October 1931. Amazing. John Ott, assistant to Thomas Edison. And here's an amazing inventor that you probably never heard of, Ralph L. Lee of General Motors. He was a man of many interests and hobbies. We have a picture here of Ralph Lee. He designed a washing machine, a vacuum cleaner. He invented several air navigation instruments. He flies his own plane and is a veteran glider pilot. Complete hobby foundry. It sits in his backyard he built in the rear of his home. Amazing inventor from the 1950s. Now probably long forgotten, but Ralph L. Lee used to work at General Motors. You may have heard that Sir John Harrington, the inventor of the auto flush toilet, is remembered really for 2 main reasons. Number 1 and number 2. And another fascinating inventor, probably forgotten in the annals of time, also from the Elsie Hicks era, is Humphrey O'Sullivan. Crazy. I have an entire booklet here from the O'Sullivan Rubber Corporation and a letter accompanying it from the advertising manager of the O'Sullivan Rubber Company, and the amazing story of Mr. O'Sullivan. We'll go here. Legend or fact? The invention of the rubber heel is placed in a Lowell print shop. Here's the story from a typewritten page dated from 1926, source unknown. Humphrey O'Sullivan, 40 years ago, was a young printer in Lowell, Massachusetts, near Boston. He walked on a stone floor feeding a printing press, and to ease his footsteps, he brought a rubber mat and placed it on the floor. His fellow employees kept borrowing the mat. "I'll fix it so they can't get away with it," said O'Sullivan. He cut 2 pieces of the mat the size of his heels and nailed them to his shoes. The results pleased and astonished him, and soon O'Sullivan was making full-fledged rubber heels, equipped with hidden washers to hold the nails, going around peddling them among the shoemakers of Lowell. They were the first rubber heels ever made, and he patented the idea. In a few years, O'Sullivan's heels were being shipped to all parts of the country. Amazing. O'Sullivan inventor of the rubber heel, strange as it seems. And another interesting inventor from the Elsie Hicks era is Eli Janney. He invented the automatic car coupler for trains. He had no mechanical training whatsoever. He was a farmer and a store clerk, spent 20 years perfecting his invention, fascinatingly enough. And then a really interesting letter here from the Ogden Standard Examiner from George Clifton. It's interesting to read your Strange as It Seems article in the Ogden Standard Examiner paper. But strange as it seems, to what I have learned some years ago, Joseph Edel, a car foreman for the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad in Putter, Pennsylvania, perfected this idea of the automatic car coupler, and had Harry Anderson, the head draftsman for the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad, drop his ideas, which was done on company paper and company time. When he kept the plans as they were drawn on company paper and company time, he basically received $1,100 for his idea. And Mr. Anderson did not receive anything as his work was done on company time, strange as it seems. While everyone knows Karl Marx, who was the famous philosopher and political theorist, a lot of people don't know about his sister Anya, who invented the starter pistol. And here's an interesting fact about Oscar Hammerstein, the famous theatrical producer who lived from 1849 to 1919. Not only was he a theatrical producer, but he was also the inventor of the cigar making machine, Oscar Hammerstein. And here the final story about inventors in the folder from the Strange as It Seems archives. This has quite a bit of information here. We've got the story from Popular Mechanics on aluminum, the wonder metal, 50 years of aluminum. This goes all the way back to 1936, but an amazing couple of inventors, Charles Hall and Paul Heroult, both the same age. They were born the same year, and strange as it seems, died the same year. But they basically devised the process at the same time, simultaneously, and basically took the price of aluminum from $4 a pound, as it was at the time, down to 18 cents. Amazing. Two men invented the process at the same time. Two different parts of the world, were born the same year, died the same year. Strange as it seems. Well, that wraps it up for this week's episode in the folder of inventors from the Strange as It Seems archives. If you like content like this, hit the bell to subscribe. Leave me a note, leave me a comment, and join us every week as we pull more and more folders out from the archives of the Strange as It Seems comic strip, which ran from 1928 all the way to really 1970. There's also vintage films, vintage radio shows down in the archives. But join us here every week, and we'll see you next week for another episode here at Strange as It Seems.